Welcome to On the Right Side of History with Kansans for Life. Come with us as we connect the pro-life movement's past to present, uncover hidden or forgotten history, and its connections to the battle still raging today. Now, here's our host, Danielle Underwood.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us again. We're so glad you're with us here at this podcast. And we hope that you're sharing these with your friends and your family, and that these are really generating some interesting conversations too. So many things we've been learning from our podcast series here. And so I'm very excited to welcome Wesley J. Smith back again for a second episode of this podcast. Today, we're going to dive into another part of your expertise. And just to kind of fill people in who maybe didn't hear the first episode, Wesley, you're an award-winning author, and you're an international speaker. You're chair of the Discovery Institute's Center on Human Exceptionalism, and you're a prolific author. You've written 14 books, 1,500 articles. You've done over 1,000 interviews. You are...
It means I'm old.
It means that you're well-traveled. And
well-traveled, I'll take that.
And well-researched, yeah. And so some of the publications people will probably recognize that you've written for would be USA Today and Newsweek, Epoch Times, National Review, a lot of respected publications, some of those. And you've written about so many different things. Today, we're going to really dig into a very interesting part of your expertise, and that's looking more at biotechnology and transhumanism. So those are huge words, and I wonder if we could just start this conversation by you kind of explaining for people who may be less aware or maybe have heard of it, but they just maybe need a refresher. What are we talking about first of all, let's talk about biotechnology. Why don't we start there?
Sure. Biotechnology is using various means to alter life and to bring about perhaps healing or enhancement. Biotechnology itself is neutral in terms of morality. It's, as often with any technology, it's what you do with it that counts. So just as one example, stem cells. Stem cells are a form of biotechnology. Now, there's embryonic stem cells, which pro-lifers would say you can't use those because to get the embryonic stem cells, you have to kill embryos, which are nascent human beings. But there are also adult stem cells, which can be used, in fact, are being used for medical treatments, and those are perfectly moral, and yet they're both dealing with stem cells. There's also something called induced pluripotent stem cells, where scientists, it's quite remarkable, could take my skin cells, they can actually revert them into a stem cell state capable of becoming any tissue, and then revert those into different kinds of tissues for use in medical treatments or in scientific investigations. That's moral too. And the interesting thing is that the induced pluripotent stem cell approach became in existence because a man, I believe his name is Yamanaka, a Japanese biotechnologist, was in a embryonic stem cell lab. And the lab proprietor said, "Would you like to look in the microscope at the embryos?" And he looked, and he said, "That reminds me of my daughters." And he determined to try to get the benefits that were being promised for embryonic stem cells. And now this is 20 years ago, but 15 years ago, but a lot of people may recall you can, treat multiple sclerosis, or you can treat diabetes, various things by using these cells to, let's say, heart disease. You can change the cells to heart tissue and then treat defective hearts. And he said, "I've got to find a way to do that without the embryo." And he did, and he won a Nobel Prize for it. And so that's a morally acceptable approach. But now some people are using the induced pluripotent stem cells to create human egg cells, ova, for use in cloning and for other things. So even the most benign can be used for wrong purposes. And that's why biotechnology is really important. It's not that you want to close down biotechnology. There's tremendous hope for treating illnesses and so forth in that sector. In fact, I think it's the most powerful technology humans have ever developed, even more so than the splitting of the atom. For example, CRISPR, C-R-I-S-P-R, I can't tell you what it stands for, it's just this long word, can genetically engineer any cell and any life form on the planet. Any cell or any life form. Now, we've already had genetically altered, engineered babies born in China using the CRISPR method. And the CRISPR method, if you do the CRISPR on gametes, fancy term for sperm or egg, then that will pass down the generations. That's called germ cell genetic engineering, okay? Because the person who was born from that will have that to pass on to his or her progeny. But there's also somatic cell CRISPR, meaning if somebody has in fact, they've already had a medical treatment for sickle cell anemia, where they use the CRISPR technology to alter the person's bloodstream so that the blood cells were more resistant to the disease, and the patient doesn't feel the pain that would often accompany the disease. It wasn't a cure, but it was a tremendous palliative achievement for people with sickle cell anemia from the same technology that both made genetically engineered babies, which is immoral and wrong and eugenics, and treating a serious illness, at least treating the symptoms of a serious illness, from the same technology. So it's not that we should be against biotechnology. It's that we should make sure that the uses of biotechnology are moral and uplifting and pro-human as opposed to anti-human or immoral.
Okay. So some people who live here in our state may be aware of the Midwest Stem Cell Therapy Center that's here at the University of Kansas that's working in
Adult
stem cells. Yep. Yeah, and our organization has worked with them in the past and supported that because, like you said, it's amazing to see, too, how those moral means or the moral goal to get those adult stem cells ready and able to bring those cures has actually had much more success, right?
Yeah, back in the days of the great embryonic stem cell fight, which I was deeply immersed in, and President George W. Bush, had put in very modest funding restrictions on embryonic stem cells. Basically, it said there will be no federal funding for any embryonic stem cell, creating an embryonic stem cell line after, I think it was August 5th or August 9th of 2021, somewhere in there. But there could be federal funding for cell lines already in existence. So this way, the federal government would not be funding for the destruction of embryos to get these cell lines. Many in the pro-life movement actually were mad at George W. Bush because he allowed any. And I defended George W. Bush because I said, that is the most you're going to get without being overturned. Because the Senate, Republican Senate and House, were ready to overturn Bush's policy. If he'd gone 1 inch further, he would have been overturned. But it's because of his policy that for about 5 years, the moral status of the embryo became front and center, which is what led to the development of the induced pluripotent stem cell. Because Bush said, I believe in the creativity and brilliance of scientists to be able to find ways to bring this technology to benefit humankind without the cost of sacrificing nascent human life. And he was right. What do you know? Good ethics leads to good science. And that's what the embryonic stem cell fight proves or demonstrates. During that time, the people who were for the embryonic stem cell funding, which would have led to human cloning research funding, by the way, which Bush stopped because of his policy, said that those of us who opposed that were anti-science. And I always said, no, this isn't a science debate. This is an ethics debate. It would be like me saying you're anti-ethics, and I would never do that because that's not a good way to debate an issue, to castigate people. But we proved that good ethics leads to good science because guess what? all of the supposed benefits and cures that were coming any moment now for embryonic stem cells, not one has appeared. There is no embryonic stem cell treatment currently approved by the FDA. There have been a few tiny little human trials on eye issues, but there isn't any. Meanwhile, the adult stem cells are treating patients and being used in research, and the induced pluripotent stem cells as well. So good ethics leads to good science.
That's wonderful. So as I've heard you talk before about what you saw from some of the scientists that were involved in that discussion. And I just wonder,
I saw scientists blatantly lie.
That's what I was going to ask you about. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I traveled the country quite a bit with a wonderful biotechnologist, scientist, biologist named David Prentice, Dr. David Prentice. In fact, I met David Prentice here in Kansas for the first time when former Representative Mary Pilcher Cook, in her first term in office, she later became a state senator, decided, Mary, if people who know Mary Pilcher Cook, she's not a shrinking violet. She decided in her first term she was going to try to pass an anti-human cloning measure here in Kansas. She didn't succeed, but she got a hearing held, and she invited me and David to testify at that hearing, and that's when I met David. And David and I became fast friends, and we've literally traveled the world discussing these issues together. But he demonstrated and was probably the world's foremost science. He was a scientist, opponent of human cloning and embryonic stem cells, and proponent of adult stem cells. He helped create that stem cell center we discussed earlier.
Yes.
And it just demonstrates that he and I would testify, and there would be scientists who would lie to legislators. They would say, just for example, that adult stem cells, like a fat stem cell, can only become fat, when that was not true. It could become a range of tissues that were related to fat, but it could be things other than fat. And we would just stand there with our jaws agape at the supposed, I'm the scientist, lying to state legislators. The other thing I saw was a lot of cowardice on the part of state legislators. We would sometimes come in to perhaps I'm talking out of school, but that's my want. We would come in ahead of time and to brief people. A lot of these state legislators, they're life insurance salesmen. They're serving their state. They might be a cattle rancher. They're not, professionals in the sense that some politicians are. And so we would come in to try to explain the technology and the science and so forth, and help them with questions perhaps they might want to ask. And every time when the scientist showed up and said, this is going to lead to cures, the people we briefed would never, not every time, but often would not say a word. And it was so frustrating because it was easy to rebut these people, but you have to be willing to open your mouth.
Mm-hmm. And what a good reminder for us now. We're all having to find new reservoirs of courage, and all of us involved in the fight to protect innocent human life. We're all having to look for that courage. And I do think, our legislators today, we had a last session, where we had our legislators did a really wonderful job of staying together and unified to pass 3 vetoes to override our governor on some important pro-life measures. And, we just want to applaud them and their courage. And we're really looking forward to seeing them in action again this year. But I do think it's so wonderful that you were able to share that information with them. And I'm sure in many cases it was vital to them making the right decision to be.
I hope so. That's why we did it.
Yeah, stand up courageously.
Yeah.
So that's it's an interesting.
And we would
background.
be brought in by organizations, some pro-life, maybe not pro-life, but we didn't just show up. People invited us to come, and sometimes he testified a lot more than I did, and sometimes we were together. But it takes organizations to actually bring in people that might have a greater understanding of these issues because that's what they focus on. And so there's a symbiosis between local organizations and perhaps some nationally known advocates or something of that sort. What I do is to try to educate people so that on the local level they can be effective. They're the ones who do the hard work. I just sit at home and write and maybe give a speech or two.
Well, you do an excellent job of really breaking things down into understandable terms for all of us. You've spent a lot of time trying to wrap your mind around all the different pieces of this gigantic puzzle. So maybe we could shift now to talk about this newer world. It's called transhumanism.
Transhumanism.
Yeah.
Yes.
Would you mind?
Transhumanism is I call it a materialistic or a secular religion in a sense. Not every person who believes in transhumanism is an atheist or a materialist, but most are. And when you have a materialistic perspective and you think that all we really are is carbon molecules, that can lead to depression and hopelessness and nihilism. And transhumanism is a way, I believe, to give, quote, hope, close quote, to people who have that worldview. Mm. The idea is, and it's almost a worship of technology, the idea is that we can achieve corporeal immortality through the wonders of science so that we never have to die. And that way, like a New Jerusalem only here on the earth in terra firma, right? And so the transhumanists will say, well, we can defeat death. For example, we can upload our minds and into computers, and with AI and all that stuff, and then we can live forever in the ether as a computer program. And I always say to them, well, look, if you are ever able to upload your mind, which is certainly not a given, that won't be you. Mm. That'll be a computer software program that mimics the reactions you might have had. You'll still be dead. They don't like that, but that's the truth. Another thing is they'll freeze their heads and then hope that at some point, after they've died, of course, and then hope that at some point they can be attached to a cyborg. I mean, there are all kinds of various approaches. Wild approaches, but the point is fear of death, fear of suffering, and trying to get some hope when you think that if once death does arrive for us all, it's obliteration. A second aspect of transhumanism, and it actually started with this aspect, is radical self-recreationism. That's a term, self-recreationism, coined, I believe, by Leon Kass, who headed President George W. Bush's President's Council on Bioethics, but I use it a lot, but I want to make sure he gets the credit for it. And that is, if I want to have a tail, I can genetically alter myself to get a tail. Or if I want to have a hawk's eyesight, I can have myself modified so that I can have the eyesight of a hawk. And then all of these various things. I think the transgender issue is an aspect of this, of transhumanism. That is, I get to recreate myself to be any way that I want. It's radical individualism. It is an atomization of common culture in many ways. And so you'll find people saying, I mean, you've had some very sad cases. There was a man called Catman who had his face altered to look like a cat, including implanting whiskers and tattoos and so forth. And you see lizard men and this kind of thing. That's an aspect of transhumanism too. It's, of course, not advanced technology. It's tattooing and horrible plastic surgeries and so forth. But that's the idea. And so there would be eventually what's called a post-human species, so that rather than sharing a common humanity, we'll have this wild individualistic experience in the future and perhaps live forever. That's essentially what transhumanism is about. It also supports genetically engineering children because, in a sense, it's eugenics, and the underlying philosophy is human beings aren't good enough, we're not strong enough, and we all die so soon. Mm. And it's to me a very sad and almost pathetic ideology, but it is gaining traction because a lot of people want to be futuristic. It is a futuristic social movement. There are certainly technologies that are being created, like brain implants to try to treat Parkinson's, that they hope can increase intelligence and this kind of thing. Engineering oneself to have greater intelligence is a major thrust of the transhumanist movement.
And that's what I've heard some about that. You know, people who want to do these brain implants to somehow enhance their abilities and meld themselves with machines. Now, all of this sounds...
It's eugenics.
All of this sounds so science fiction to people. I think it's very difficult to even an everyday person. You know, we can't imagine this actually happening. I mean, this sounds like something that's literally written in comic books or in, you know, some kind of sci-fi fiction.
Yeah, but that's the trap. Because we can say, oh, that'll never happen, roll our eyes.
Yeah.
And guess what? It's already happening. As I mentioned, there are already genetically engineered children in this world
And
that were eugenically enhanced so that they knocked out a gene that may be associated with catching the HIV virus, which is why he did it. It was totally in China. By the way, China's the nation where ethics goes to die.
I was going to ask you about China specifically.
Yeah. And a lot of times, even American scientists, they can't do things here, will work in China because it's a way out. And that it's an international crisis, in a sense, ethical crisis. If you have these rogue countries, and I think China would qualify for that in this regard, that will allow almost an anything goes approach to biotech. China wants to create, super military people, and that's what, and some of other scientists have said this. It's the Superman philosophy returned. It's eugenics returned, only instead of crude like the original eugenics of not allowing people to procreate, this is genetics with sharp teeth, because you're going to use all of these advances that are being made in biotech and in other forms of technology, cyber AI and this, artificial intelligence and so forth, to basically improve the human race. Well, that does away with universal human equality, doesn't it? Because it means that you think some people are better than others. And that's the cause of so much destruction, murder, oppression, exploitation, where somebody thinks that one group of humans is better than another group of humans.
Classes.
And and it's utopian. And I think one of the most dangerous aspects of human life is utopianism, because it's about creating paradise on this earth. And once you go there, then the means justify the ends. Or the ends justify the means. I always get that mixed up. The unfortunate thing is that when you have that attitude, the means become the ends. And that's how you end up with murderous regimes and other kinds of very terrible exploitations and oppressions.
Yes. So I've heard you talk about how really this bioethics, this moment in bioethics, is almost more fraught with danger than when the atomic bomb.
Yeah, I've said, the atomic splitting the atom was the most powerful technology up until that time. And they understood the need for regulations. I mean, I saw the movie Oppenheimer, which is really quite excellent. And not getting into the controversy over the actual scientist, Dr. Oppenheimer, but he did understand, my gosh, look what we've created here. There has to be international regulation and rules to govern how we work with atomic energy. And there was a substantial success. Nuclear nonproliferation. Of course, it hasn't held 100%, obviously. We have too many countries with atomic weapons, but not every country in the world has atomic weapons. Most don't. Also, the peaceful use of atomic energy has been regulated internationally. And one of the things that has upset me so much is when you have like CRISPR, a biotechnology, that can lead to a terrorist deciding to take a normal flu bug and make it so that it is truly deadly, that would make COVID look like it's just a sniffle, and we're not trying to really regulate it and control it on an international level, and scientists are basically insisting that voluntary guidelines are enough, which they aren't. Who knows what will happen? And this technology, is almost a wild, wild west. I mean, you have voluntary guidelines that can be followed or not followed. And if it isn't followed, what will happen? Well, maybe you have the looked down on by your peers. But if you don't care about that, what good is that? You might have some funding restrictions from federal money, but if a true billionaire wants to pursue these issues, how do you stop it? You have to have regulations. But nobody talks about that on the international stage. I'm not being partisan here, but during the entire Trump administration, I was screaming through my writing, so it's not yelling literally, to President Trump, please try to institute some international conversations to regulate this. Silence. He never ever mentioned the issue. I haven't seen President Biden mention the issue either so far. Haven't seen the media ask the presidential candidates, well, what about this biotechnology? Is there anything we can do to make sure that the positive aspects of the technology are allowed to proceed, but that we can thwart, hopefully, the negative aspects? Not one reporter that I'm aware of has asked any presidential candidate that question. And it seems to me that should be one of the first questions asked. We get the usual bromides that we all know what the talking points will be. Let's ask something different. Hey, media, let's be a little creative. Let's put them on their back foot and ask them something they haven't been asked before. And that certainly would apply to this technology. Because the dangers are pronounced and the benefits are pronounced, potential benefits.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, the science by itself, as you said, it's neutral. Right. We can use it for good.
The dark side of the force or the light side of the force, to use that metaphor.
Yes. And it's frustrating for all of us here who are not those scientists up in those ivory towers, doing, or in those laboratories somewhere being funded by some billionaire. It seems that they are unchecked. That we are unchecked. That we have no protections against those types of efforts.
At the moment, I don't think we do. And let me give you an example. Going back to that Chinese scientist who created the genetically engineered babies. It was done through IVF and the changing of the genes. He thought he was going to be lauded, but there was a huge outcry when this happened. And I wrote, and I believe it's true, they're not upset at what happened, but when it happened, because the people had not been softened up that how beneficial this is going to be, like they did the embryonic stem cells. People are going to get out of their wheelchairs and walk, which of course did not happen. But people bought it because people are so afraid of disease and suffering that they thought, well, if Uncle Charlie's Parkinson's can be cured, let's go. So in China, after the brouhaha broke out, the Chinese put this scientist in jail. Now, it wasn't that they didn't know what he was doing. This is China we're talking about.
They know everything.
They know everything. They had political operatives in the labs letting the powers that be know. I've talked to people who were deeply involved in investigating this. There were higher-ups in the Chinese government. I don't know if it went to Xi Jinping, but very high up who knew he was doing this. So to save face, they were embarrassed. They put him in jail. Well, he's out of jail, and guess what? They gave him his own lab. What do you know? So it's basically...
What a punishment.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the fix was in there. They just did that to save face. We need
a little bit of damage control.
Damage control, thank you. We need some statesmen on the international stage to say this is so portentous. We have got to start having some serious international discussions on controlling these technologies and directing them in positive ways in the same way we did the splitting of the atom.
I think you make a powerful case for all of this, and I think I'm just curious.
And people could ask you go to a town hall. There are a lot of town halls, House of Representatives people. What are you going to do to help regulate this biotechnology? Ask them. Write letters to the editor. Talk, just do what you can. Any kind of political advocacy, social advocacy in this regard. I think it's very important. Otherwise, we're going to be at the we will get some very good things like the sickle cell anemia treatment, but we could also get some very bad things like COVID times 10.
Mm-hmm. So you are really challenging us
Yes.
to, first of all, get more educated about what these dangers are, what they look like, and how
And the
unchecked-
benefits,
Yes,
because you don't
good
want to
point.
come across as Luddites.
Okay.
You don't want to say I'm against progress, because we're not against progress. Good science, good ethics leads to good science. And that's, again, just as it was with the embryonic stem cell debate, which is, of course, archaic now. The embryonic stem cell issue is nothing compared to some of the things coming down the line now.
So talk to us about, what do you see as the biggest threats ahead of us? What are those potentials?
In this technology area? I think I worry a lot about radical reproductive therapies, three parent embryos, which they're already creating.
How in the world could someone do that? What is that?
Well, it's a quasi-cloning. It's not actual cloning. And they say it's to treat mitochondrial disease, where some women pass through the egg mitochondrial disease onto their offspring. And so what they do is they take an egg, take out the nucleus of the egg from one woman, take another woman's egg that doesn't have the mitochondrial problem, take out the nucleus and put the first nucleus where that was, and then fertilize that egg, and it leads to an embryo and perhaps a child, which I think there's been one born in England, I'm not sure, with three biological parents. Well, that can be used to prevent mitochondrial disease, which is the excuse, but it can also be used to create novel family forms, which, of course, we're seeing up and down the line now. An anything goes approach to procreation. And a lot of people saying, I want a baby, and I'll do anything to have a baby. And my reply to that is, well, that's the problem, isn't it? That you'll do anything to have a baby. And I understand the heartbreak that can come from not being able to have a baby. But on the other hand, there are things that we shouldn't be doing. We shouldn't be making babies as an issue of manufacture, because that leads to what? Quality control. Any manufacturing process leads to quality control. And we see that in already with reproductive therapies of sex selection of embryos, of doing testing on early embryos to see if they have conditions that we don't want. That can lead to, we've seen mass eugenic abortion of babies, unborn babies with Down syndrome or dwarfism, and this kind of thing. So I think the greatest danger, I'm not going to point to a particular technology, but it is the dehumanization aspect of biotechnology that can make us think of ourselves as less than exceptional and basically malleable clay to be molded in our own fashion and hyper-control. And it leads to a loss in the belief in the equal dignity of human life, regardless of the condition that human life might be in.
Absolutely. When I hear you talking, it makes me think about how it's almost, we're making humans into products.
Exactly.
Almost like you would have an upgradable iPhone by you installing a new app or something.
And that's
like
what transhumanism is. It's a human as a product. Perhaps I'm my own product, but that's what it is. And in our other show, we talked about various things involving euthanasia, how that can lead to organ harvesting. And so people who are approved in Canada, for example, for euthanasia become a product if their organs are usable and if they consent to organ donation after they're killed. So that is the objectification of human life, treating human life as a natural resource like a corn crop or a copper mine.
So what can we do?
Well, we have to
Yeah.
insist that our leaders pay attention to this and stop dealing with trivialities
Very good
that are in comparison. It's up to us. If we put in, it's still a democratic society, despite some challenges in that regard, but it's up to us. And hopefully some people will come along, because a lot of this is being driven on the international stage by very rich people who are funding a lot of this research. And I'm hoping that at some point some very rich people will step up and say, I know this needs to be contested, and so I'm going to work and support people who are willing to devote themselves to that agenda.
I think that really ties back to a common theme we've had in some of our other podcasts too, about not being bystanders.
Yes.
I think so many times we think we have such busy lives and we don't have more time to be able to give to causes. So maybe, we think we've got to hit that baseball practice, or we've got to, go run that
Which is
errand.
important.
Very important.
But the problem is that the other side on these issues, often that's their means of earning a living.
Yes.
And for the people on this side of the issue, often this is an avocation where they give of themselves freely after they've earned their living and after they've fed their kids and after they've gone to the soccer game, which they should do, go to the soccer game. So I'm hoping that at some point some deep pockets will say, well, let's let a lot of people earn a decent living contesting for ethical science.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So other than educating ourselves and making sure that we are actually speaking up to our elected officials, asking them these tough questions that maybe they have not thought about, maybe they, are focused elsewhere and they just need a little bit of prompting from us to start paying more attention to what is coming at us, and these huge ethical questions that continue to it seems like they're getting more and more challenging,
Yes.
not less so.
And there's one thing that they can't force you to do, and that's be unethical. So regardless of the law, and the pro-life movement is in terms of abortion, when abortion is legal, that doesn't mean you have to get one. So regardless of what your life circumstance is, you have the power to not engage in unethical behavior. And that's powerful too, because refusing to do it in and of itself sends a powerful message to others that they cannot do it as well. And so just like, let's say, doing something unethical, let's say shoplifting, if it's not punished, can lead to more shoplifting. Doing what's ethical can lead to more ethical behavior. So lead not only in terms of talking to your representatives and so forth, lead by example. Live your life in an ethical way. And that will help other people have the courage and the strength, even in the face of very difficult circumstances, to do what's ethical. Mm-hmm. I have a very close friend in Canada who had advanced multiple sclerosis. And during the embryonic stem cell fight, his name is Mark Pickup, if people are interested, and he has a blog called Human Life Matters. And he said, even though I've got advanced multiple sclerosis and I'm told that embryonic stem cell research can prevent that and perhaps treat it, I won't do it. And he was very vocal about it. And I thought to myself, wow, I mean, that's really putting yourself, it's not just Wesley saying, oh, this isn't ethical. That's somebody who had skin in the game. Mm-hmm. And he said that if that came about, he would rather have the MS, which is very difficult, than engage in embryonic stem cell research, or embryonic stem cell treatments, which he thought were thoroughly unethical. Mm-hmm. So we have to have the courage to do what's right, even at the cost of our own comfort and sometimes even efficacious improvement in our physical condition.
Yes.
That's hard. That's very hard.
And being willing to share the story as well.
Yes,
because
exactly.
someone might do that silently and make the personal stand. Yeah. But how much more powerful when someone is willing to speak up and share that.
And today the discourse isn't based on intellect or principles as much as emotions and feelings. We don't think, we feel. Mm-hmm. And one of my arguments is we have to stop feeling and start thinking. So don't say, I feel this, I feel that. No, you think this, you think that. Feelings are ephemeral. Feelings, you get a feeling, it might even be a wrong feeling. That doesn't mean you have to act on it. Thinking requires principles and rationality. So even that little thing, instead of saying I feel, which I still catch myself doing because it's so common now, say I think. Mm-hmm. And that's really important, thinking. That's part of what makes us humans. Animals have emotions just like we do, and emotions are part of the human condition, but we think. And that needs to be stressed, and not only in how we work through problems and difficulties, but in how we speak.
And along that same line, I would also add, I think we need to be very intentional about protecting our own minds from these we know that same, the huge amounts of money pouring into some of those unethical scientific experiments are also backing these giant, I would call them propaganda campaigns to cause us to think, just like you were saying, to kind of soften the ground ahead of these things being introduced so that they become maybe a little bit less scary to us or even somehow attractive, that they might entice us by, making this appear to be a good thing. So I would say, it's very important that we protect our minds and that, to your point exactly, thinking clearly about all of these topics, seeing what the connections are between them, and seeing the lie behind some of those messages that are coming at us to tell us that we are less than by just being the humans we are. Those are all lies. And
yes.
Being human is a beautiful thing,
and it can
and exceptional.
It can seduce you into very bad places. A quick illustration: during the embryonic stem cell fight, I was on a talk TV show in Canada, where people would call in, and we were talking about the embryonic stem cell issue. And a father called in, and he was very agitated with me. And he said, listen, I have a disabled daughter, and I don't care about embryos. I'm going to do whatever it takes, anything, to make sure she can get treatment, which is totally understandable. I mean, we love our children, right? And I said, well, let's explore that. I said, if it took more a 6-week embryo as opposed to a 1-week embryo to help your daughter, would you do it? He said, yes, anything. I said, how about a 6-month-long fetus? Would you have that fetus destroyed to help your daughter? Yes, anything. And I said, what about a baby who was born disabled? Would you do that to help your daughter? He said, yes, anything. I said, sir, you've just put your own daughter on the slab. Because he got seduced in his deep desire for his daughter to be helped into believing that we can treat human beings as an instrumentality, and the people who are going to be treated as an instrumentality are going to be the weakest and most vulnerable among us.
Very true. Wow. So much that we've just covered, so much ground. And I think it's so important for all of us to continue to first of all, we should all be following you and your work and learning from all the things that you're putting out. I guess I would just say that really quickly. So if you are interested in following Wesley J. Smith, I highly recommend you go to either his social media, and on Twitter and Facebook, he is at the Wesley J. Smith. You could also find him and his writings and his podcast on humanize.today. That's humanize.today. Thank you so much for coming in and, first of all, doing this doubleheader with me and doing this 2-part series. I feel like there's no way in the world that we could have covered everything that we covered in one. So it really was a great gift to us and the people of Kansas.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So on behalf of Kansans for Life, thank you to you. And thanks to all of you who joined us today. If you care about life issues like these, like all of these intertwined issues we've been discussing, and you're looking for something you can do today to help, please share this podcast. Share it out. Tell your friends, tell your family. Talk about the things that you learned that you realize you want others to know too. And if you want to stay up to date on this and all pro-life issues, you can visit kfl.org and sign up there to receive our updates. That's kfl.org. And you can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, now called X, Instagram, and TikTok at Kansans for Life. And as we say, never forget, the pro-life movement is on the right side of history. Truth always wins in the end. We hope you'll join us next time. Thank you.